I'm Eliza Sherman. I'm the CEO of Ellementa, and this is one of our Women's Wellness webinars. Thanks for being here. We are joined today by Dr. Swathi. Hi, Dr. Swathi.
Hello. Thank you for having me.
Oh, I did say your name right, correct?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I should have checked sooner because I'm Eliza and everyone always says Eliza. And I'm like, no, it's not that. It's not that. But once you say it wrong, then it's stuck in their head. So I try to be mindful of people's names and pronunciations. We have a lot of information to talk about today, really good information and helpful information for anybody who's interested in learning how to speak to a healthcare provider about cannabis and CBD. Today, I really want you to come away from this session empowered with better information about how to take care of your health and wellness, to take charge of your health and wellness. And I'm going to briefly introduce you to the Ellementa Women's Wellness community before we get into the actual program. So Ellementa started out holding in-person events for women to gather together and talk about cannabis and CBD for health and wellness. We've evolved and we've also had to change because of the nature of things right now, no gatherings. So we are doing all of our events online, and we've expanded beyond the topics of cannabis and CBD to general health and wellness for women. You can always find out what's coming up next at elementa.com/events. We also review products for you, CBD products, products with THC, and now we're doing a lot more general plant medicine as well. So you'll start to see some reviews showing up on things that are not related to the cannabis plant at all, but are related to other kinds of plants, including mushrooms, adaptogens, different kinds of herbs. So we're really excited about bringing a wider range of products to your attention. And we're really careful to vet the company, to try the products ourselves. We do have specific cannabis product testers, by the way, in the states where it is legal. I'm not one of them. I'm one of the CBD testers. But we're really trying the products and then giving you our honest opinions about them. Now, I'd like to know a little bit about those of you who are watching live at the moment. Let's see if I can pull up this poll. This is a new thing for me. Will it allow me to do it? Okay, 1 second. I'm going to try. See if this shows up. I hope everyone can see it. Can you all see the poll? Dr. Swathi, can you see the poll by chance?
Yes, I can.
Okay, good. So we can't take the poll because we're panelists, but those of you who are watching right now, feel free to take the poll, and I will give it a few more moments. So those of you who are here right now can actually answer the questions. Have you spoken with your general health practitioner about using cannabis or CBD? And I was specific about general health practitioner because a lot of us seem to feel comfortable maybe talking with one of our alternative healers, for example, a Reiki person or a massage therapist. But when it comes to our regular general practitioner, we might get a little bit nervous. Okay, let's see. I can end the poll now. And you should see on your screen the results. 40% of you have said yes, you have spoken to your general health practitioner about cannabis or CBD. A few of you said you don't think you can. And that's possibly true. We'll hear from Dr. Swathi in a few minutes about why some of us feel hesitant about it, why even doctors feel hesitant or practitioners feel hesitant about it. Let's see. So at the moment, by the way, it looks like Jen is saying she doesn't see the poll up on her screen. Let me see if I can share that. Well, let me just read it to everybody. This is new because I'm handling all the behind the scenes tech myself. It's 40% say yes, they've spoken. 40% say I don't think I can, and 20% say well they haven't spoken yet to their health practitioner about cannabis and CBD, but they plan to. Okay, let's see. I'm going to head back to our presentation really quickly, sharing my screen. Wow, I feel, I feel like I've got multiple arms doing multiple steps here. We're back. We are back. And we are back with Dr. Swathi VARANASI. Did I say that right as well?
Yes, that's right.
Okay, excellent. Well, Dr. Swathi, I am going to ask you to tell everyone a little bit about your background.
Great. Yeah, it's so nice to meet everyone. Thank you for taking the time to be with us on a Sunday afternoon to learn about this. So, as was mentioned, I go by Dr. Swathi. I'm an integrative health pharmacist and a medical cannabis consultant. And so I co founded and am currently the only pharmacist in the US with any formal specialized postdoctoral training in pharmacy when it comes to integrative medicine and cannabis. And so with that training, I specifically did that training at an independent natural pharmacy and HIV clinic in LA. And apart from that, I do quite a bit of teaching at colleges of pharmacy and colleges of traditional Chinese medicine. This past semester, I taught 5 credits at one of the local schools, and I thoroughly enjoyed that experience. That might actually come up in today's conversation. And then also, I serve as a medical consultant for quite a few CBD and hemp brands, where I answer questions from their team, I answer questions from their customers, and I also help with some content creation when it has to do with like scientific content. Another thing that I'm involved in is leading some research projects with College of Pharmacy students. One of them that will be published really shortly, which is very exciting, and then the other that will be presented at the Cannabis Science Conference in 2020 in June. So overall, I'm just so excited to be here. I'm very passionate about educating practitioners and students, patients, and caregivers on the endocannabinoid system, and also the importance of food and nutrition when it comes to the mind, body, spirit connection. So thank you again.
Oh, that's fantastic. Really, really interesting stuff. So, speaking of the endocannabinoid system, I usually have a couple of slides where I explain as I understand the endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids, and terpenes. So I'm going to go through those slides quickly for any of you who are tuning in live or are watching this video after, just to give you some basic background in case you're not familiar with why cannabis and CBD work the way that they do with our bodies and our brains. So first, the endocannabinoid system. Think about science class and how you learned about all kinds of systems in the human body, from respiratory system, nervous system, endocrine system, reproductive system, digestive system, all of these systems we know about, but we never heard about the endocannabinoid system. Well, why is that? Several reasons. First of all, it was discovered in 1989, 1990, like really identified by scientists who were studying cannabis and cannabis effects on mammals and on humans. So that's one reason it had to do with cannabis research. Another reason is because it is pretty recent that this system was identified. When you think of all the other systems we learned about in class, those systems were identified back in the 1800s or even earlier. So that said, the endocannabinoid system is like a constellation of different receptors throughout our body and our brain. And those receptors, 2 of which have been identified and fairly well researched to date, and that's CB1 and CB2. Now, those still need to be researched really well, and there are other receptors in this system. But those 2 receptors are the main ones. And think of those receptors as locks. And chemical compounds in cannabis called cannabinoids are keys that will unlock specific effects in our body and in our brain. Anything that you might add, Dr. Swathi, to that general description about the endocannabinoid system?
Yeah, so one thing I really like about this diagram is the different colors that are on it. So when we're looking at the keys, so THC versus CBD versus the CBN, I really like that the THC and CB1 are the same colors. So that kind of shows that relationship between THC and CB1. And then you can see the same with the CBN and CB2 receptor, but that CBD is gray, which means that we don't know actually where it binds or like how it actually impacts the endocannabinoid system, but we know that it impacts endocannabinoid tone, and that's the most important. But yeah, more and more research is going on right now trying to figure out exactly how CBD is involved.
And is it correct that CB1 is more prevalent throughout the body and brain? CB2 is a little more focused on our immune system?
I would say overall, yes, but there are CB1 and CB2 receptors all over your body. So I don't know if I necessarily would generalize, but it is true that there's a higher concentration in the central nervous system with CB1, and then CB2 is more linked to immune function.
Okay, interesting. Well, thank you for that additional information. Let's talk a little bit about the cannabis sativa plant. So in the cannabis plant, and now this does include a hemp plant. So the difference is the cannabis sativa plant where we get our THC tends to be a high resin plant that is higher in THC, which is a cannabinoid. And the hemp plant is a lower resin plant that tends to have little or trace amounts of THC. And it's just the way that they're grown. So THC, CBD, CBN, CBG, and all of the alphabet soup, those are representing chemical compounds inside the cannabis plant, present in the plant, called cannabinoids or phytocannabinoids, meaning plant cannabinoids. We have naturally occurring cannabinoids and cannabinoid-like substances, and those are called endocannabinoid, which means inside of the body. Our endocannabinoid system responds to cannabinoids in the cannabis plant. And cannabis is incredibly rich in cannabinoids. Now, there are other plants that have cannabinoids as well. A good example is echinacea. Some other plants have cannabinoid-like substances like pepper and cacao, which is your chocolate. So it is prevalent in other plants as well, but not as abundant as cannabis. So I like to call cannabis sort of a super plant, like a superfood, because it has so many cannabinoids in it. And that's also why when people talk about it can help with anxiety, it could help with pain, it could help with all these different things. And you think, what is it, a Ginsu knife? That's obviously a joke for somebody who's my age. But it really can do many different things because it has so many different chemical compounds that react in our bodies. Anything else, Dr. Swathi, you would add about cannabinoids?
Nothing in particular, but your conversation made me think of cannabimimetics. And so that's other activities or substances that you can intake that also impact your endocannabinoid system, whether it's directly or indirectly. Echinacea is one of them that I always talk about with the CB2 receptor and immune function. But there's also other things like exercise is very much linked with one of the endocannabinoids, anandamide. So there are quite a few other things too. So I think just giving the bigger perspective of not only substances, but also like activities and hobbies too, and like mindfulness.
I like that. I don't think I've ever really put all of that together. Thank you. And the other thing that I know about anandamide being a molecule in our bodies, which the researchers named the bliss molecule. So anandamide is Sanskrit for bliss. So that bliss molecule is something released like our endorphins when we exercise. Also can be released, particularly in women, with dark chocolate. So if you ever get a good feeling from dark chocolate, and I'm one of those women who gets a very good feeling from dark chocolate, that is releasing or keeping your anandamide there. So there's things that release your anandamide, and there's things that prevent the anandamide from breaking down so quickly, and that gives you that really good feeling. So terpenes are also prevalent in plants. So the fruits and the vegetables we eat have terpenes in them. Terpenes affect smell, taste, color. And what I've always loved that have helped me understand how cannabis can be medicinal. I'm really into aromatherapy. And Emma Chasin, I'm not sure if you're familiar with Emma Chasin, but she's been a guest several times, and she talks about terpenes being the aromatherapy of cannabis. So I can really relate to that. My favorite aromatherapy is lavender. Now, I didn't realize lavender has a terpene called linalool, which is mildly sedating. It's relaxing. And I think that's why I gravitate toward it. So it helps relax me. Well, cannabis also has linalool. Here in the photos on the slide, you see a pine tree. So pine has a terpene called pinene, or beta pinene, alpha pinene, and cannabis has the same terpene as well. Citrus fruit has limonene, and so does cannabis. Mango has myrcene, and so does cannabis. So cannabis is not only rich in cannabinoids, it's also rich in terpenes. And those terpenes can interact with each other, and they can interact with the cannabinoids. So anything you wanted to add about terpenes before I go to the last basic slide?
Yes. So when it comes to terpenes, the way I think about it also is through learning about essential oils. So from the integrative health perspective, that's something that we talk about quite a bit is essential oils. And so being able to associate certain therapeutic benefits with certain terpenes, I think is great. Linalool is a great example, as well as like limonene for lifting mood, as you can see on the slide too. The other thing I wanted to say was there are different percentages of different terpenes in different strains of cannabis. Mm-hmm. And so that's how you can figure out like, oh, this one might have a little more linalool in it because it smells this way. And then if it has that certain percentage, then maybe you can associate that too with the therapeutic potential of that strain, which is why you'd pick like that strain over something else, depending on the patient's ailment and a host of other factors.
Yeah, that's a really good point. And I like to also point out that asking for test results when it comes to purchasing flower or looking at the ingredient list when you're buying a manufactured cannabis or CBD product can help you better identify the percentages. And one thing I learned from Dr. June Chin, who is the co-author of the book Cannabis and CBD for Health and Wellness that she and I wrote together. One of the things she told me, which I think is really relevant for women, is she tells her female patients to avoid myrcene or avoid too much myrcene if they're menopausal. So that's one of the interesting things, because if you're looking for a sleep aid, for example, linalool might be very helpful. CBN as a cannabinoid could be helpful, but myrcene, while sedative, it can also be not good for a menopausal woman. I don't have all the other details. Do you know anything about that by chance?
I know just about as much as you just said there. I would give the same suggestion, but of course there's more research to be done. I would love to know more once that comes out.
Yeah, that would be really good for those of us who are in that stage of life. One last quick thing, I had hinted at this. Cannabinoids can work together and affect how each of them work, and terpenes as well can add to and make things work better or block things. So a good example of this is THC is binding to CB1 in our brains, but CBD, even though they're not quite sure, it doesn't exactly bind. One thing it can do is temper the way that THC is binding, affect that binding, and actually change that high feeling that THC might give you. So one example of this is if you feel too uncomfortably high ever, then you could take some CBD and it pretty rapidly will reduce that uncomfortable feeling of being way too high. And that's because they're antagonistic, meaning they sort of work against each other, but in a useful and productive way. They're also synergistic. So CBD works a lot better with a little bit of THC. Even a small amount of THC can help the CBD be more therapeutic. Anything you wanted to add really quick? Oh, by the way, Entourage is what it used to be called. Ensemble is what I learned from Emma Chasen, because it's more like an orchestra. It's not like THC leads the way and everything else follows. They all really work together.
I think that this slide, as like a supplement to the slide, would be an opportunity to talk about the CBD isolate products versus broad versus full spectrum. I see on the bottom, so it says, to be legal, CBD must contain less than 0.03% of THC. And so that's after the 2018 Farm Bill. And so that helps the conversation veer to like CBD isolate, for example, being only the CBD. So everything else has been removed and it's only that CBD in the product. But then if we're talking about broad spectrum, so broad spectrum has CBD as well as the other minor cannabinoids that we saw in some previous slides, like CBN, for example. And it also can have terpenes in it. But then when you get to full spectrum means it has everything that I just mentioned, but plus that 0.3 up to 0.3% of THC.
I wanted to point out, I'm pretty sure this is a typo on my part, and I apologize. It's 0.3%, correct?
It's 0.3, yes.
Okay, not 0.03, everybody.
Yeah, I found myself saying 0.03 and being like, oh no, it's 0.3.
I know. I was looking at that going, I think I moved the decimal in the wrong place on that one. I apologize. So it's 0.3% is how people say it and write it. And so that is what the legal percentage of THC in a product that can be shipped to most places. Now, remember, every state has its own rules and regulations about THC and about CBD. So always be careful if you're looking to obtain this product. Make sure you know the laws of your state and also, in some cases, your city, your county. Just understanding what the laws are. But that's a really good point. So I appreciate you adding that in. Now we're getting to Dr. Swathi, some of the points that you wanted to make about the topic at hand. So take it away.
Sure. So as we all know, there's been an increase in popularity and curiosity from patients and caregivers and even practitioners about hemp and about cannabis in general over the past decade, but really I feel like it's amped up over the past few years. And so studies show that there's a positive studies show that when there's a positive relationship between the patient and the practitioner, it actually can impact the patient's overall health outcomes. And so what that means is having that trust and that bond and that open communication between both parties can really lead to the patient having better outcomes and having a better effect from the treatment. And so when it comes to an ideal practitioner-patient relationship, I think it really comes down to what I call patient-centered shared decision-making. And so what that means is that the patient and practitioner work as a team when discussing the patient's goals. So that's very important for the discussion to figure out what the patient's treatment goals are. And then they work together to figure out how to achieve them. And so I think that's a pretty different mentality than Western medicine, when a lot of the times I see that a provider is just coming in and telling the patient in a few minutes what their recommendation is, but not really taking into account the patient and their preferences, their lifestyle, and their goals, of course. So I think that this relationship really highlights the importance of having a receptive and also knowledgeable practitioner. I did want to mention that it's not well known that the endocannabinoid system is actually something that's not taught in most healthcare professional curricula. By most, I mean most, like almost all of them. It's starting to be integrated now. And so whether that's through a guest lecture, through an elective course, but it's not yet a key part of the didactic coursework. And so because it's not a part of that, there are very few opportunities to have a clinical rotation or like a practical experience before graduation if you are a health professional really in any realm. And so I think that's why it's so vital that the patient have this opportunity to have this relationship with a practitioner who's genuinely interested and who's also who's put in the time and the effort to learn about the endocannabinoid system through additional coursework after they've graduated, whether that's through continuing education, through online educational platforms. There's some great ones out there right now. And that can best help their patients the more they know. So as I mentioned before, with the popularity and curiosity, so many patients are asking these questions. And that's actually one of the reasons I got into the cannabis space in general, the medical cannabis space, is because so many patients and practitioners started asking these questions. So then I started learning more, and I got more excited about the plant and how much potential there really is for healing when it comes to the plant. And so I just started learning more, and now I'm in this space and could not be more excited to be here, because I love that I am able to answer those questions for people. And then once I answer that question, then hopefully they can answer the question for the next person too. So there is that kind of like trickle down effect. And also I think it's important to mention that if the practitioner does not have that education, it's fine. But I think that the patient at that point should ask for a reference to another practitioner who does have that knowledge. So I think it's very important to have that guidance and support from someone who has taken. Sorry, I thought I heard a reverb. For someone who has taken that time to learn about the endocannabinoid system to help their patients. And then in terms of a warning sign for a bad relationship or a problematic relationship, I would say if the practitioner is judging the patient, or if the practitioner is feeding into that stigma, which leads me to the next slide.
Okay. Yes. Stigma. I think it's not just patients who face and deal with stigma. It can also be our practitioners.
Yeah, definitely. And I think the stigma comes, from years ago, from even the Great Depression, even prior to that, and just the way cannabis has been criminalized in America just for years and years. And I think that really that 1937 Marijuana Tax Act, when cannabis became illegal in the entire country, I think that was really like a turning point for people just starting to have this mentality that potentially cannabis could be dangerous. And then when the DEA put it in Schedule 1 for the controlled substances. So, Schedule 1 means that there's a high abuse potential, but there's also no therapeutic benefit at all. And so I feel like a lot of the research since then has really proved the opposite of that. And so I think that is what is most known when it comes to people talking about cannabis, that they haven't looked into it. And so I think that's really where a lot of the stigma is rooted in. And I think that's why it's very difficult to change the minds of a lot of Western practitioners, because that is something that that they've been exposed to in that way.
Yeah, I think what also a lot of people, particularly people involved in the industry, tend to say the stigma is gone. There is no more stigma. And I think a lot of us don't even realize how deeply ingrained it is. If you think about it, most of us, depending on our age especially, have been indoctrinated into thinking that cannabis is evil and cannabis is dangerous. And obviously, cannabis is illegal. And all of these different things that, well, on the legal side or the illegal side, there is still truth to that, but the dangers are not there. And the studies are there. So the other thing that you hear a lot of, there's just not enough research. There's just not enough research. And there's so much research out there. And maybe not all from the United States, maybe from other countries, including Israel. But I think a lot of this misinformation plays into the stigma. And then denying the stigma is there can make those of us who still feel that stigma feel very isolated or very ostracized because we're still affected by it. I know that even though I've learned so much and intellectually I know that it is legal where I live, it is medicine, it works, I still sometimes look over my shoulder and worry about, well, who's going to judge me or who's going to, and then I'm afraid to say to my doctor, they'll think I'm a crazy person. Luckily, I have a new practitioner and she was very matter of fact. She goes, look, I don't really know a lot about it, but she was not rejecting it outright, and she didn't make me feel embarrassed for asking. So
that's really important. Yeah, I mean, I definitely feel that on the practitioner side, that a lot of my colleagues or a lot of the people that I graduated with in pharmacy school don't really understand why this is the path I decided to go down. Just because they have, as you said, have been indoctrinated to think in this certain way. So I think that's just why education is so important. And I would love the education to start from the student level. And that's why I'm so passionate about going in and lecturing at colleges of pharmacy and colleges of traditional Chinese medicine and other practitioner programs to hopefully start disseminating that it's not as dangerous as we think, and there really could be so many possible benefits from it.
Yeah, I agree. Next slide.
Yes, next slide. Great. So the preparation. So once you've found that practitioner that you want to work with, who's knowledgeable and who's supportive of you, it's the next step would be to prepare for the appointment. And so what that means is first bringing a list of questions. So this list of questions will show that you did your research, and it really helps build that connection, and it really helps build that trust between you and the practitioner, that the practitioner knows that this is something that you've given a lot of thought to. And then in terms of research, I mean, that could be cannabis formulations, and then even like potential side effects and adverse events that you can ask them about. And then the next thing would be to be prepared to discuss your diagnosis. So that includes how long you've suffered from your condition, and any symptoms that you've had associated with it. Also, what types of products that you've tried already, whether that's prescription, non-prescription, natural product, homeopathy, anything, to let them know what you have tried. And tell them how that went, if it went well or not. And then any other thing that you think is important to them making the decision in terms of your lifestyle and in terms of the exact treatment goals that you're looking for. And I think it's really important to be able to answer that question of why, because I think practitioners are always wondering, why does this patient want this treatment? So I think you should go in knowing how to answer that question and be ready for that.
That's really interesting, because that is a very good question to ask and to be able to answer, because it's not that we want to get high. Well, some of us might,
exactly.
But that, I think, is a really good way to set the stage for subsequent treatment and conversation. Yeah, that's a great one.
Definitely. The other thing before I forget is also just be ready to discuss your current medication regimen. So that's everything from prescription, dietary supplement, Eastern herbs, Western herbs, cannabis, homeopathy, everything, just so the practitioner is able to get a full picture and that holistic view of your life and your medication regimen before they start adding other things to it.
I remember when I first filled out those intake forms that you have to fill out every time you go to the doctor or every year. And I was really nervous about putting cannabis and CBD. Just the act of doing that was a lot. But I think preparing and having that list written out already and having paper and pen ready. I've gone into some doctor's appointments without a notepad and without a pen, and really found myself at a disadvantage. Some doctors do move very quickly. The conversation goes very fast. And then they walk out the door and you're like, oh my gosh, I forgot this question. And then trying to get to them after that can be challenging. So I love the idea of just going in. And I've started to make that as much of a habit as I can, to go into any practitioner with paper and pen just at the ready, because sometimes they also give additional information and we walk out going, what did we just talk about? Well, at least I do. I want to remind everybody who's tuning in live right now that you can type in some questions. I'm unable to see them right now while I'm handling the slides. So we will get to them shortly, very shortly, in the Q&A period. Also, there is a Q&A function. Some of you might like to use that instead. Either way, we'll look at both places to find your question, whatever is most convenient for you. And we will be taking some questions. If you have comments, I apologize for not seeing them as we go along, but I'll definitely make note of them. And we can talk about that further when we get into the interactive portion. Ready for the next slide?
Yes.
Okay.
Great. So these are just some recommended questions. And these can be questions that you come in, you have them on your notepad, or you have them in your journal ready to discuss with your practitioner. And I think this will also help you evaluate whether they're a good fit for your treatment goals. And that could be anything from drug-drug interactions to any possible side effects or adverse events, but then also the expected effects too of the cannabis treatment. So everything together, and then also here on the slide too, the CBD formulations, what the differences is between them, or what the differences are rather between them, and which would benefit better for a certain ailment over another. Great. Okay, so more tips. Taking notes. So that was just mentioned. That's great that you already brought that up, because that's something I really wanted to stress. That suggestion of keeping what I call a cannabis journal. I think it's a great place to have all your questions and all that preparation ready in one place. But then after that, taking notes during the visit and having a place to document how you feel when you're starting and continuing through the regimen until your follow-up. And so I think it can be helpful when deciding what to try next or what to do next when you have all those details to discuss with your practitioner. Some examples of things you could write down are like how much you're taking, when you're taking it during the day, how you feel immediately after, how you feel 30 minutes after. Do you feel like you're getting that that relief that you're looking for? And then any unexpected effects, like a side effect that you want to discuss with them. Great.
And I think this the idea of don't be intimidated is so important. Many of us, have been led to believe that what your health practitioner says to you, particularly your general Western medical doctor, is concrete and is the way it is. We tend to get intimidated by our healthcare providers. I've been in a lot of settings with various types of healthcare providers, and some of them use intimidation. And they also, I've had some health practitioners get very angry with me for asking too many questions. I think you really want to find someone who is patient with you, who will respond to your questions and also respond honestly. Sometimes they won't tell you they don't know. I mean, I liked that about my new practitioner, where she says, I don't really know a lot about that.
Right.
And then find one who's willing to learn and look into it as well.
Exactly.
Yeah.
That was some other things I was going to bring up. So I'm glad you brought that up. And then the other thing was also don't feel intimidated to reach out and ask questions even between visits. That should be something your practitioner is excited and available for you.
That is a really good point too. Because like I said, they'll walk out the door, then suddenly you remember something. I have actually gone back out to the waiting room and then said, could I speak to the doctor again? Or could you get him a message that says this? Just to continue that conversation rather than walking out the door, then maybe I'll end up forgetting about it, or I don't end up getting through later. So just not hesitating to make sure you get the information you want, the answers you need, and the treatment you deserve, so you can feel better.
Definitely. And I think it's really important to draw on the point of helping the patient feel empowered to take control of their treatment and their journey to health and wellness and healing. And the practitioner is so key in that, but giving your patient that confidence to be able to ask the questions and to want to take that step forward.
Yeah, and that really is the difference between a really positive patient practitioner relationship and one that causes more stress than not. And you don't want that relationship to be a stressful one.
Right.
Well, this is now the interactive portion, so I'm going to stop sharing slides at the moment, and we are going to turn our videos back on and check out the different questions and comments that are there. There we go. Starting my video. All right, let's take a look and see what we've got. We have a doctor, 40 years, cannabis author, media personality, educating MDs and attorneys since 2016. Hi, so Dr. Is it Durbo Delu? I hope that I'm pronouncing that very good. I'm so glad that we have a doctor here. Jen says, I know terpenes are connected to scent, but when taking cannabis products in an oral form, for example, edible, oils, tinctures, do the terpenes affect the therapeutic benefits as well? Or do you look to cannabinoids and flavonoids, which I didn't mention the flavonoids for those products? Yeah, if you could speak to that a little bit.
Yeah, definitely. I think the terpenes will have that therapeutic benefit regardless of the formulation. I know that if you're smoking it, for example, then you'll be able to smell it more than actually ingesting it. So I understand why the question would be asked. But I think overall, if that terpene content is there in that strain that's being used to create the edible or used to be consumed, I think that the goal of that would still be to get that therapeutic benefit from the terpene.
And there is something to be said, and I think it's called first pass liver. Yes. Okay. Right? Could you explain a little bit about when you're ingesting cannabis, CBD, any of these terpenes, et cetera, there's that thing called first pass having to go through liver versus inhalation. Could you talk a little bit to that?
Yeah. So when it comes to first pass, that means that you're ingesting it. It's going through your GI tract and it's going through and it's going to be metabolized in your liver. Whereas when you're inhaling it, it's not necessarily going to follow that same path. So there won't be as many barriers necessarily to it being metabolized, which is why some people say that they maybe get the effect a little quicker than for it having to go through all the different pathways. And then when it comes to liver metabolism, though, it's really important because that's actually how CBD, THC, other cannabinoids that we know of, that's how they're metabolized. So regardless of if it's going through first pass or not, it's actually still going to be metabolized by the same enzymes. And so that's really big when it comes to drug interactions, which is a big question that I get all the time about, are there any drug interactions I should be worried about?
Oh, and we've got that. That was the next question queued right up. Pia asked, are there medications that cannabis may have negative side effects with?
Yeah, definitely. So when it comes to the SIP system, so just building off what I was talking about before, so CBD is metabolized by two enzymes that are in the same enzyme family called the CYP450 enzymes. And so it's CYP3A4 and CYP2C19 for CBD. Those are the primary ones. And then for THC, it's CYP3A4 and 2C9. And so there are other medications that are also metabolized by those enzymes. Actually, a very high percentage of prescription medications are metabolized by CYP3A4. But there are other ones too that are metabolized by 2C19, 2C9. There are other CYP enzymes as well that might be involved, but kind of like at a more minor level. So that is something that is definitely worth discussing, particularly if they're on warfarin as a big example, just because there is it's called a narrow therapeutic index. And so that means that the medication will only work in a certain window. And so it's really important to have it in that specific window for the patient to get the benefit. And so for drugs like that, it's really important. And that is one of the medications that is metabolized by a lot of the enzymes that I just mentioned. So that could be one of the medications. But it is worth noting, though, a lot of the research that has been done with drug interactions, they've been done with doses that are much, much, much higher than what the average person is taking. So yes, even though there are demonstrated drug interactions that we should know about as practitioners, I don't know if it's something we should be necessarily scaring our patients with, because the likelihood is probably so low for someone who's taking like 10 or 20 milligrams a day. So something to know about, but there are certain medications like warfarin where I am a little bit more worried because of that narrow therapeutic index. There's also some anticonvulsant medications. If the person wants to reach out to me, we can talk a lot more extensively about it. But that would be another like drug class that I would be concerned with.
Well, so warfarin, is that the blood thinner?
Oh yes, the anticoagulant. Yeah.
Okay, because that is one that I've heard. So when you think about interactions too, it could either make it more powerful,
yes,
or make it work less effectively. So there's two different ways it could really go.
Right.
Making a blood thinner more powerful, more effective. While it sounds like a good thing for a blood thinner, it could be a bad thing.
It could be too much.
It could be way too much. And then that could be dangerous.
Yes.
But knowing that they can titrate down off of the medication, you put that a little bit lower if having the CBD or having the THC is something that could also give you further benefit.
Yeah,
so
potentially. And I think
not do it. It's not like avoid it at all costs.
Exactly.
Figure it out.
And I think that's, again, like why it's so important to have that supportive practitioner who knows a lot about this. Because if cannabis really is a great option for their ailment, then that would be the opportunity for the practitioner to look at the other medications they're on and see how everything can be tweaked accordingly. Maybe something needs to go up, maybe something needs to go down. It just depends.
Another thing to think about too is that maybe you have a trusted physician who has no knowledge about cannabis or CBD. Maybe then you've also reached out and you've found a cannabis physician, somebody who's very well versed in cannabis and can help treat you. Get them to talk to each other.
I was just going to say that. Exactly.
Because that's the biggest thing of all is you can't necessarily force your doctor to go on a whole new path to learn a whole new thing, but they can consult. They can do a consult with all of you. And that is the other piece of just taking charge of your healthcare is if you have various practitioners, make sure they know each other, make sure they give what is it called? The permission for information, the ROI, to allow them to reach out to each other and access your records and access your treatment plans and all of that. That is just a smart way to handle your own healthcare and making sure everything is consistent and interacting properly.
Definitely. That's something that I failed to mention earlier, that just because the practitioner doesn't know doesn't mean you need to leave them immediately. As long as all your practitioners know what's going on and all your treatment teams know, I think that's the most important.
Yeah, I do think so. Somebody asked, Ina is saying, what are some new books that you would recommend that are good for cannabis information? Okay, well, first I have to plug
oh, yes, please
do. So my book that I co-wrote with a cannabis physician who has been practicing for over 15 years, many of those years in California, and now she's practicing in New York, currently practicing. She's an integrative physician, so she's integrating cannabis along with Western and Eastern medicine, is Dr. June Chin. And our book is called Cannabis and CBD for Health and Wellness. And if I wasn't sheltering at home 2,200 miles away from my actual home, I'd be holding up my book right now. Cannabis and CBD for Health and Wellness. I recommend that book, not just because it's mine, but because Dr. June she's brilliant. The information is written from a layperson standpoint, but it covers everything from history to the botany of the plant to the endocannabinoid system, cannabinoids, terpenes, and then various ways it's used, different forms that it comes in, different ways that you administer or take it in. And then she gives patient stories.
Oh, great.
So that's really helpful too, to see like, how does this really work? So she talks about how, and it's another thing I think that's important is it takes time. It takes calibration. And it's different for every single person. And so it might be too much. It might be too little. It might be the wrong strain. It might be the wrong cannabinoid. But experimenting with that is not dangerous as long as you've got the right supervision. And it takes time. And I think that a lot of people think, I'm just going to go and I take 2 and call the doctor in the morning and tell them I feel great. It's not really like that.
Right. And I mean, there's so many prescription medications that are the same way too. If we talk about like an SSRI, for example, that's sometimes prescribed for depression or anxiety, a lot of those take 6 weeks to work. And so we can't just assume just because it's cannabis or whatever it is that it's going to work immediately. So being able to have that patience, well, I guess have the patient to have that patience, but also the practitioner to have the patience too, to go through that process with them.
That's a good point. Another question. Do health insurance companies penalize patients who use cannabis with or without the approval of their physician? Do we know?
Not that I know of. I mean, I'm sure it depends on the insurance company, but I'm inclined to think that that I don't really know if that's something that they're necessarily looking for. I have heard, I don't know 100%, but I have heard that if a patient gets that cannabis use disorder diagnoses code, and if that's in their file, that could impact them. I don't know if that's impacting them on the insurance level or if that's impacting them on another level, like another practitioner, for example, buying into the stigma and judging them, kind of a thing. So that's the only thing that I can think of to answer. I'm not sure.
And it's hard to tell. That's an insurance question is really best handled by an insurance expert because it's so complex and often makes no sense whatsoever. Another question. This is a really good one, and I had one too, similar. How does CBD affect the kidneys? And then my question is, how does CBD affect the liver? Because I did mention I'm the CBD tester for our company, and it suddenly occurred to me, am I hurting my liver by trying these various products? And I'm super careful before I even try. If there's too many ingredients that I don't recognize, can't pronounce, basically too many ingredients, which for a nice, pure, full spectrum hemp should not have ingredients.
Right, exactly.
I get very careful and I won't take it, but I am trying various products. I do try some isolates. I do try some broad spectrum. Kidneys first, then liver.
Okay, so since we were talking about metabolism before, I can go back a little into that. So because most of the CYP enzymes are concentrated in the liver, I would not be worried about if someone had poor kidney function. That's not something I would be worried about with giving them cannabis or recommending cannabis for them. So the kidneys is not something I'm generally that worried about. Even the other CYP enzymes, if they're not in the liver, there are quite a few in the intestines, but not really not really a high concentration in the kidneys. So I'm not worried about the kidneys. When it comes to liver, I would be concerned with the liver if there are other medications that are being metabolized by the same enzymes, and it's possible if both of them are interacting in a way that that will be detrimental to the kidney. Sometimes they work in one
to the liver, right?
Oh, it's to the liver. Oh my goodness, yes.
Very important. Good. I just want to make sure that we're talking liver now. Okay.
Yes,
because this is definitely my question, because I'm not taking any other medications really. Occasionally I'll take like an airborne, which is some herbal supplement, or I might take boron, I think is what is pronounced. It's called oscillococcinum, which is
boron. Yeah, the homeopathic company.
Yeah, the homeopathic. I take a lot of homeopathic stuff. Cold Calm, oscillococcinum. I love their products, and I don't take it regularly.
Yeah, and that's if we're going to veer off the path a little bit. So homeopathic products are so great because, like, at least from the pharmacy perspective, from the integrative health perspective, there's very, 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 very low risk of drug interactions because the concentration and the dilution is so low of what's in there. So sometimes if someone comes in and they're on a huge list of medications and they need all of them for their different diagnoses, then maybe homeopathy is a good option for them.
I love homeopathy. I learned about it in the 80s when I used to travel to England a lot. And at their pharmacy, Boots, which was their big pharmacy chain, I would pick up all kinds of homeopathic remedies and floral essences, the Bach floral remedies and things that I would get back to New York and nobody had any idea what this stuff was.
Oh, definitely. And Boron is an international company. And I mean, one of the things I really like about Boron, I work with them and they are very, very committed to education. They have an entire branch that's only for education. So that's the branch that I'm working with to help put them to help put together a book that has allopathic and homeopathic remedies side by side.
Can you define allopathic really quick?
Oh, sorry. Allopathic is just like OTC, normal OTC.
Over the counter.
Over the counter medications. Yeah.
Okay. Interesting.
So I really like that they're so dedicated to education.
That's excellent. That is so good to hear. Let's see. We've got a little bit of a dosing question. How do I know how much CBD to take? Very individual, very hard to answer.
Question. I think that's just like highlights how important it is to have a practitioner. It's so dependent on the person, their other diagnoses, their other medications they're taking, how long they've had the ailment. There's just so many factors, particularly with cannabis, because it is a plant medicine with it just being so complex. It's not just a prescription med that has one compound in it. It's very different. So I can't answer because I don't know enough information about the person. I'm sure if the practitioner were to start with them, they would start slow, continue slow, and see what happens after that. But I couldn't give a recommendation over a webinar.
Yeah, any reputable doctor who's giving a lecture or a webinar will always say to you, I cannot tell you individually because it's an individual thing. And that is perfectly honest. And I would say it would be very suspect if a doctor were to just tell you right away, oh, take 30 milligrams twice a day. I mean, that would be irresponsible. So
yeah, I agree.
It's a hard question because you get that question all the time. What is my dose? What should I take? There are ranges. And there are ranges, what a low dose. So for example, a low dose of THC, but the range is quite wide.
It's quite wide.
Yeah, a low dose for me is somewhere between 1.5 and 2.5 milligrams of THC. And that is it. I mean, anything beyond that, and I'm uncomfortable.
Right.
But for somebody else, it could be 25 milligrams.
Oh, definitely.
Just like, I don't feel anything.
I've seen quite a range too. It just really depends on the person. And I mean, it's fascinating also because it's not like other medications that would be different for age groups or that would be different for like body composition or like certain like body composition in terms of like how much the person weighs. Like there's a lot of other medications you can do by weight and things like that. So it's very unique to the person.
Yeah,
and then
which is where the journal. The journal you were talking about. We talk about that all the time. Keep a journal and starting low, going slow. That's the mantra.
Exactly.
For THC. And it's also a mantra for CBD. The other thing to mention before we sort of close on this, and I definitely want you to finish off with any last points you'd like to make, is that CBD doesn't necessarily give you an immediate effect. Like you don't just take that CBD and go, wow, I feel it like THC, which is pretty fast. Sometimes you don't even feel that day that you've taken it anything differently. Other people super sensitive, like I can be extremely sensitive. And I remember my very first Ellementa gathering, I was leading it. It was in Anchorage, Alaska. This gal showed up with a wonderful full spectrum CBD oil and she was placing drops under ladies' tongues and I was just like, okay, I'll try some. I was so like, ooh. The whole time I don't even remember this meeting. I felt bright and light. It didn't feel high,
right?
But I definitely did not feel the same. I felt very different. So can you get high off of CBD? Technically speaking, you can feel something different or you might not feel anything for a while.
Right. And that's that goes back to the conversation that's like I feel like kind of very big right now with the psychoactive and what does psychoactive mean? Because a lot of people say CBD is not psychoactive. I think just by definition, psychoactive means that it's active in your brain. So I think it is. I would define it as psychoactive. But I think a lot of the terminology is moving towards like intoxicating for THC or euphoric, I think is a great one. But moving away from calling one psychoactive and one not.
Yeah, that's really good. I think it's Dr. Ethan Rousseau who I had heard first saying something about that.
Yeah, me
intoxicating THC is intoxicating, CBD is non-intoxicating. And it is good to be much more accurate with our words. As a writer, I'm really into being more accurate, particularly because we have been plagued with so much misinformation around this plant. Right. So being able to have the same conversation with the same language, with the right, more precise words, I think is very, very important. Anything else you'd like to leave everybody with? Right after we're done with this, I will go back to slides so everybody knows how to stay in touch and but anything else you want to add real quick?
No, nothing else. I really appreciate the opportunity to come and talk about this. If anyone has any more questions, please feel free to reach out to me and add me on LinkedIn. Let's stay in touch. I'd love to meet more people in the community.
Well, I really appreciate you being here. And I'm going to bring some slides up. We just stay on the video. It's totally fine.
Okay.
I wanted to let everybody know that you will be able to see a video of this afterwards, although it takes about a week or so. Right now, it's taking a little longer than a week. It's going to be put up on our website. If you're on our list, you'll get the link to that, and you'll be able to watch this over again. Wanted to also let you know, here's how you can stay in touch with us, with Ellementa. You can go to ellementa.com/groups and join one of our Facebook groups, which are mostly state-based or country-based. And then there is ellementa.com/gatherings, or really in this case, also the ellementa.com/events. They have the same information. We're not meeting in person though, so you're not going to see that right now. We're only meeting online. Then we're on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, and Pinterest. Can you give us your website address and your LinkedIn? And you're on Instagram too.
I am on Instagram, yes. Okay. I'm starting to build that up. So my website is www.drswathi.com. So DOCTORSWATHI.com. And it's just my full name that is on one of the previous slides that you guys can look at for LinkedIn.
Okay, perfect. And Instagram, you're Dr. Swathi.
Yeah, I'm Dr. Swathi on Instagram as well.
Okay. I wanted to just also remind everybody that we have a lot more coming up in May, and I'm adding more and more of these webinars. I'm really enjoying the fact that we're expanding beyond cannabis, although you will still see some cannabis topics as well. On Wednesday, May 6th, 99 Walks That Will Change Your Life with author Joyce Schulman, who will talk about her book of the same name and her community called 99 Walks for Women who walk virtually together. And then Sunday, May 10th, Erica Grafe, who is often one of the tech support, the technical goddess on some of these events, is going to be talking about cannabis and moms. And that happens to be on Mother's Day. So just take an hour out of your time for yourself to talk about that. Then on Wednesday, May 13th, we've got Lori Barron from Priya, hold on. I'm whistling as I say that. Priya Apotheca, which is a gorgeous, gorgeous, luxurious CBD beauty line. She's one of the co-founders, and she's going to be talking about herbs and immunity. So that is not really a cannabis conversation, although we may talk a little bit about CBD. So those are some events, and thanks everybody. I really appreciate it. Dr. Swathi, thanks so much for being here. And everyone, be well. See you next time.